The Greymoor chapter for Elder Scrolls Online has been out on PC for just over a week, I think. This brings the Western Skyrim and Blackreach area to the game for the first time, plus new activities and skills like the Antiquities system. Does this game live up to the hype that's been brought on it by the connection to Skyrim? Let's find out.
Hey, you're finally awake. We just crossed the border.
The new opening cinematic sets the scene for this chapter with vampires and werewolves and the witches of the Icereach Coven being the primary focus of the turmoil that's being experienced in the Western Skyrim region and below the surface in Blackreach Caverns. There is a lot of interest on this chapter and how it compares to Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. While there are many locations that you would remember from Skyrim that bring back that nostalgia feel that I think a lot of people are looking for, Morthal and Solitude are the real standouts here. The first time I walked through the valley between the mountains that leads to Morthal, if you know what I mean, that nostalgia really hit me, and it reminded me of this moment in Skyrim where you're typically set upon by a dragon, in my experience at least. The similarities don't just stop at some of these overworld places, you can also notice it on some of the building interiors. They're very reminiscent of Skyrim, like if you go into the inns and that kind of thing. There is a very Skyrim feel to this DLC, and I played a little bit of Elder Scrolls V to get some footage for this video. You do notice that the world is almost identical, but it is set well before the events of Elder Scrolls V, so there are some differences of course. The Greymoor chapter does something different to some of the previous ESO chapters, adding two new regions being the Western Skyrim overland area that you see and the Blackreach Caverns below the surface. I was actually surprised at how dense the Blackreach Caverns are, and they are filled with your typical overworld locations like world bosses, quests, the new ritual site world events as well. There is also a type of new location in Western Skyrim called giant camps. To complete these, you need to kill a giant or two and eat some mammoth cheese, which makes you half giant for a short time. It's just a little fun side activity. It doesn't really add much value to the overall landscape of everything that's occurring in the world. But I would actually prefer these than the typical landmark locations that you get in regions within Elder Scrolls Online that just have that eye. You just kind of go there, you discover them, you don't really do anything else with them. These are a nice little refresher, and it's a cool little comical moment where you just, grow in size for a couple of minutes. Both regions have a lot of space for exploration and new quests, though none of these are new to the Elder Scrolls Online formula. ZeniMax has a pretty standard formula to a lot of their zones, especially these chapter zones, and they have stuck to that here. The only real change is that you also get the Blackreach region underneath. Both of these new regions are very distinct, the cold mountains of Skyrim and the dark underground of Blackreach. Exploring both regions as the main quest takes you above and below ground was a refreshing experience to mix up the zones compared to a lot of the other chapter zones that they've added, which are typically a single region, and there often isn't a lot of variation in the landscape. They follow a very similar theme, whereas there is a stark difference between the overland of Western Skyrim and underneath in the caverns of Blackreach. Skyrim is very different 1,000 years before the events of Elder Scrolls V. Dragons and civil war aren't the main themes of the DLC here, although you will visit some of the closed dragon mounds from Skyrim, which is actually a cool touch. And there is an interesting side quest which is tied to these events, which is tied to the Elder Scrolls V, which I thought was really intelligently designed. The events of Greymoor are much darker, with werewolves and vampires running wild in Blackreach and starting these violent storms known as the Harrow Storms, which are the new Dolmen type world events that we've got from the other zones. I've completed almost all of the locations with 2 world bosses, 2 dolmens, and 1 lore book remaining. This and the main quest and the antiquity system took me around 25 hours. I wasn't rushing through the content, and there is definitely still more to do here, especially in the antiquity system, which I have yet to max out and get some of the high level loot that you can get from that system. As a returning player, I was excited to see Lyris again and tackle the threat of the vampires and Icereach Coven that was affecting Western Skyrim. The new characters introduced in this chapter are very well written, and the arc of the main story with these characters, they do experience really great character development and growth. Savannah is a really standout character for the chapter. There is also some smaller returning characters that if you're a veteran player you may recognize, but they don't play a big role in the overall story. They're more just there for some side content. If this is your first experience with Elder Scrolls Online, the game does a great job of introducing the key characters, themes, and the game's mechanics in the new Greymoor tutorial. The new tutorial is set after the events of the new cinematic, which I just showed earlier. It lets you try out all the different weapons and teaches you the basics of combat like blocking, interrupting, light and heavy attacks in a very short introduction before throwing you out into the open world of Western Skyrim. For myself, I'm always worried about joining a game late and feeling like I've missed something. However, if you're new to the game, this won't be the case here unless you venture outside the Western Skyrim Blackreach Caverns area. The main plot here is very clear and doesn't really require any prior understanding of the game's events, and there are minimal references to events that have happened throughout Tamriel in recent times, like the other chapters in the main game, which is a positive for new players. As I mentioned, there are some reoccurring characters, Lyris is a key one, but most of the main characters for the chapter themselves are new to the game, so you will be experiencing the same journey as a veteran player. There is obviously all the additional content that you'll get. If you buy the Greymoor Chapter, you'll get all of the previous content, which you can experience at your own time. And I personally believe that the Elder Scrolls Online is a much easier game to get into as a newer player because there is no level restrictions to the content that you can do. You can just do whatever you like as you please. It's a really big plus for the game. For better or worse, some of the side quests that are in Western Skyrim and Blackreach are tied to the overall themes of the Greymoor chapter. Most of these quests I found repetitive, and too often you're dealing with issues related to vampires and werewolves, which is eerily similar to the main quest plotline where you're doing a very similar thing. A lot of these side quests seem to blur together, but there are some really good standouts like the Orc clan at Mos Khazgar and one of the doggos called Pickle. You can't go wrong with a quest where you have to follow a nice doggo. You also get to pat him at the end. A new addition for new and veteran players is the Antiquity system. You can start this activity in Solitude at the Antiquity Circle. The circle sends you out to scry old artifacts using the Antiquity's Eye to find the location of said various items. Once you have successfully scried the item, you can head out into the world to find the dig site. This system is great, and it's a very intuitive and unique idea for a game like this. It's very rare in an RPG, or an MMORPG for that matter, to have a system with this depth that doesn't revolve around combat in any kind. You may, fight people on your way to dig sites, but this whole system is specific to scrying the item, finding the location, and then exploring to find the dig site. And there is a skill line tied to both of these events, scrying the item and the dig sites themselves. The purpose of this activity is to give players, especially solo players, another activity to participate in that has its own reward system, including unique rewards like new gear, exclusive housing items, and a mount. I've spent a fair amount of time during my activities throughout Western Skyrim taking a break and participating in these antiquities leads and spending time in this activity. And the scrying and digging minigames are challenging, but they're not too difficult, and as you level up the two new skill lines, they do become easier to complete as you gain new abilities in both systems, so there is a really good sense of progression here. The only negative to the system is that some of the dig sites are hard to find, and the areas you're given are often very large. Even if you nail the scrying and you only have one possible location for the artifact, minor side note here, you can keep scrying the item if you don't nail it the first time. I highly recommend doing that and not searching areas. If you have 2 or 3 possible locations, it could be just keep scrying the item, or else you're making it very hard on yourself. This footage here is a good example of how hard the dig sites can be to find. I spent maybe 10 minutes looking for this one dig site, and I could barely see it from a distance as it blends in with the snow. But this does get easier as there is a specific skill to increase your visibility of the dig sites. Outside of this though, I really like this system, and I hope they continue to expand it in future chapters and DLCs. It's exciting to kill a boss and get an Antiquities lead to go and scry and try and find that item. The revamp to the vampire skill line and the minor changes to the werewolf line isn't something I have specifically touched on, as my striking Templar Khajiit isn't really a vampire or a werewolf. I've made a new character which I plan to turn into a vampire and really delve deep into these skills, but there are plenty of guides out there if you're interested in learning how these new skills and abilities are different to the previous ones. From what I've seen, most of these changes are positive, but if you are a new player, you're not going to notice the changes anyway. But the skill line is more representative of being a vampire in Skyrim, as you can get that big vampire form that looks dope. Elder Scrolls Online continues to impress and grow with each year of content that they add. The Year of the Dragon last year, the Dark Heart of Skyrim this year, with more content coming in the remaining 2 quarters of the year. It hasn't been fully confirmed, but from what I can tell, the quarter 4 content is probably going to be the Reach area of Skyrim. It's been heavily implied throughout the chapter that they are up to no good, and I believe this was also teased in the reveal event back when they did that. So it seems that while we have the Western Skyrim, we're going to get even more Western down into the Reach area of the zones as well. If you enjoyed Skyrim and haven't played the Elder Scrolls Online, this is definitely the time to give the game a shot. It's a buy in my mind, with the familiar locations but a new take on the Skyrim as we've all become accustomed to over the years, really. There is a lot to love here for new players and returning players as well. I enjoyed my time back in Tamriel and I plan to play a lot more. Hopefully I can get that new Antiquities Wolf mount because it looks sick. If you have any questions about the game, this chapter, or anything in particular, leave them in the comments below and I'll happily get back to you. If you're interested in the Elder Scrolls Online, check out some of the other content I have on my channel about the game, as well as Fallout 76, which I've been talking about a fair amount lately. Thanks for watching this video. My name is NorZZa and I hope you have a great day.